Hello, Fernando Janer Sanchez, the
Hello,
famous,
hello, hola.
the famous inspirational Viking of the class of 2014 of
Wow.
CCNM. Yeah, right. So you,
The
you are.
inspirational Viking.
What did you say?
The inspirational Viking. I didn't
I
know.
remember the horns and
Yes,
the
yes, yes.
and the announcements. And you are the mind body professor and you're are coming to us live from Puerto Rico.
Mhm. You can see.
And you are a professor at the Naturopathic school there, which I believe is called La Universidad Ana G Mendez. Is that what it's called?
That is correct.
Yes. Can you
Universidad.
tell us? Can you tell us about your work in the program?
I can try. I am faculty at the Naturopathic Medicine doctoral program. We can never pick a short name. We always we like long words. And the program is in the Health Sciences School of the Universidad Ana G Mendez Gurabo campus, which is in the southeast of Puerto Rico, of the main island of Puerto Rico.
Mhm.
And my work there right now, it's focused mostly on the clinical and physical diagnosis course series
Hmm.
and on the mind-body medicine course series. And so I'm the mind-body guy to some people, and there is useful because I'm a restless little kid. So the breadth of topics that they both require is suitable to me, and the fact that mind body allows me to put in the social. See, I knew, like, it's 2 minutes and I got it in there. I got it
In
in
the
there.
first soundbite in the
No,
elevator speech, Fletcher, you nailed it. Yeah.
in case internet crashes, I got that in there. And so it allows me to really cover a bio, psycho, socio, ecological perspective. And that's wonderful.
Well, I mean, we have the mind, we have the body, and you've brought in society into the
I did
curriculum.
that.
You
Yes.
did it. How did you weave that in?
Um, I chose a text. I don't know many, I only know of two. And the text book or text video audio compound had a theme on class. And imagine being as an ND, the word class, like I've heard it when you're in class, right? That's about it. You're in class or in classroom. And so it allowed me to do that. And just because of my previous background and education, I expand equity, diversity, inclusion, gender, race, ism, the whole notion. And fortunately, there's good research that tells me I'm not crazy, that in fact, social relationships are key to health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can you tell us about some of that research, or some of the
Yes.
maybe the Cole's notes, or you can read the whole text if you want.
And it's called Mind Body Medicine. It's part of a series of great courses that some company has. They have one on the Black Death, which I highly recommend. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of those events. So it's interesting to be doing this call now.
During our own
Yeah,
not so black, not so death, but
yeah, depending on the community where you're standing, it could and can or cannot. So the book really covers different topics. The previous material had a focus on energetic medicine, and so fair enough, but it was practically too limited to have 3 classes on that. And as a social worker for life, without taking into account our social being, it was not complete. So this book, with one of 2 main, it allows to really capture that. And part of what we cover is the Harvard because any MD program is like being on Harvard, or better in some ways, or worse. I don't know.
Depends what
they
class
have a nice
you're
training. Yeah, I guess it depends on the class. You know what I'm saying? But I completely lost track.
I'm talking about Harvard and your mind-body medicine course.
Yeah. Sleep is so important to health and mind and body. And so it's so hot here, like in that beach you're looking at, is so hot that I'm completely adapted to the heat. But this is what's coming this summer. Is going to be the corona that's going to kill is the corona of the sun. Anyway, I was saying, Harvard has this longitudinal study of men, because women were not allowed in university when it was started. Mind, body, right? Bodies.
No female bodies. Yeah.
No female bodies, right?
Or minds.
Yeah, and in fact, in Spanish, we could play even more with that, because we have cuerpo, cuerpa, cuerpe, like non-gender. But in English, it's just one non-gender term. Anyway. So they do this study and they find that for your cardiovascular health at 80 years old, the most important indicator when you're 50 years old is the quality of your relationships and your satisfaction in your relationships. And they find that satisfaction in interpersonal relationships is more important at 50 for your cardiovascular health at 80. It's more important than your cholesterol levels. So I'm like, yes. So like, did we get questionnaire about, do you have confidence? How many friends do you have? Like in your labs, can you include social connection, degree of alienation? So that it's good fodder for me to be a prankster in class, you know, and it was just good validation of many things that we have discussed over the years and a view, and it's really scary because I have 3 years to get some friends, to get really high quality friends, and I feel a bit behind with that. So it has that side to it too.
So they assess this via questionnaire. They pulled people and asked them to rate their relationships or ask them some questions about it.
It's a mega complete study with the kind of,
the whole thing. Yeah.
The kind of assets that the trust fund of Harvard must have. So they measure everything.
Absolutely.
All unimaginable questions. And so there's a million different published studies from following those people for a really long time.
Right, yeah, they have the whole observational study across time, the multivariate analysis, all the bells and Harvard whistles. And bottom line is, if your friends invite you to McDonald's, you go.
Give and take. But it might be better to have a Mickey, whatever they call that, some chicken McNuggets with really good friends, than to have kale with some so-so relationships.
And that's going to be the quote for the episode. We've only just begun. It's better to have your nuggets with your soulmates than kale with your frenemies.
Ooh.
Yeah, and so you got 3 years to build up some friendships. Well, what else have you covered in your class? Like what other things? So definitely the quality of social relationships, at least for men in cardiovascular disease. And
so the class follows a biopsychosocial approach, which is familiar from behavioral sciences or mental health, some perspectives. And so we love number 3, and it's usually incomplete. There must be a number 4. One of the main posited candidates is spirituality, so biopsychosocial spiritual. It is my humble opinion that 4th dimension is ecology. That is that other realm beyond relationships. So it's better to have your nuggets with really good friends in the forest or in a place with green and some water and birds chirping or something than to make love at a cheap motel downtown. I don't know.
With kale.
With kale. With kale.
And yeah, I know that you are a big advocate of nature cure, forest bathing.
I am.
The Shinrin-yoku approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the other beauty of the course. So we start with the biology, which, if you prefer more scientific language, the psychoneuroimmunology, they keep adding to it. Why don't you say whole person, just cut the chase. And so we start with that. And it's actually really valuable to see how we are not just biological beings. So we start out attacking biological reductionism in our profession, right? And then we go on to psychology, which is then the psychological segment. And I think a lot of mind body is translated as that, and it's focused as psychobiology. And then we proceed to some social determinants, which I feel are really key. And it's really wonderful because it allows me to go into ecotherapy and make fun of a profession that has nature in the title, but it never spends any time in nature. So like it allows for great fun. And we actually go out. You see where I am actually. So, and Puerto Rico, it's a tropical jungle, naturally, that we have tried to make into Miami. But some of that nature is still there. And so part of the class is to go out and go on trails and ideally follow that kind of nature cure thing where you would hike till you got a little bit sweaty, and then you go in a river, which is cold, and wow, I feel so much better, and I'm relaxed.
And you're just observing, like you're taking your class out to nature, and you're having experiences. Yeah,
which is nonverbal, and I try to not be cognitive or in a blended effort. At this point, I know a few studies which I can point out at different times and see, like a photo that I showed you where my son is looking out to the southeast of the island from the mountain. That tends to produce awe. So awe is related to interleukin-6. If someone is fortunate enough to not know interleukins, I love you, stay that way. It just means that you have inflammation and your body's saying, holy shit, I want to deal with this. So that's what, that's the what do you call that? The chemical messenger for saying, holy shit, I don't want to deal with this.
Interleukin-6, yeah. Interleukin Skywalker.
Something. Yeah.
And it's, interleukin-6, one of the major inflammatory cytokines, ladies and gentlemen. Now you know. So now you've been tainted at the risk of being too cognitive. And so the sense of awe decreases inflammation.
It's associated with lower levels of interleukin-6, which some have found elevated in some recent global phenomena. But I don't want to get all snake, I don't want to cause more stress to people.
You don't want people to get their notebooks out.
Anyway, so we do that. And I used to teach hydrotherapy. And I'm like, why don't we actually go in water if we're in hydrotherapy? Like a real water, not a bucket, Not
a bucket, yeah.
Not our buckets. So the final exam is walking in El Yunque, which is our most famous rainforest. Every tourist that comes here gets taken to El Yunque. If you ever come and honor me with your visit, you will go to El Yunque. And so we just walk the trails, and then we go into a nice cold waterfall, cold for us, for Caribbean bodies. For you, it'll be laughable. It's like, wow, it's so like horribly hot here. Is this a sauna? But like that little bit of a contrast, for us, it's big. And so that's a final exam. I no longer teach hydrotherapy, and that's included in the mind-body series. So we try to go out 3 times, and in the PowerPoint regime, I include some information about that.
Yeah, that cognitive element, you have to, for the mind.
No, and it's persuasive too. It's good to know that it not only feels good, that there's neuroimmunology and everything with neuro in front of it. You know, if you have booze, neuro booze is better than just booze, right? So,
and it does have an effect on the neurological system. So
there you go.
You might as well just say neuro booze
You
from
might
now
as
on.
well say neuro booze.
That's absolutely true.
Neuro hard cider.
Neuro gluten-free beer. And
There you
so,
go.
hopefully enjoying the company of positive people, not, so that you don't outweigh the effects of the gluten-free. But you talk about the biological reductionism. So maybe at the risk, again, of being too cognitive, we can just define that, or maybe get into a little bit of detail around that.
What I would try to say quickly, which I'm not famous for, is how we literally reduce all the experience and manifestations of humanity, of human beings, and certainly of health, to its biological component. One of the studies that I love the most, because it's very relevant to me, is they infect people with rhinovirus. Just rhino. Rhino, mild.
Not
Here.
corona, rhino. Yep.
Rhino. And they put them in quarantine. But before that, they have them assess their socioeconomic status or their occupation and the subjective value of their occupation. So someone that feels high esteem in their occupation is much less susceptible to developing the infection, right? They're both exposed, but their cognitive, emotional, neurological, immunological functioning works better against that infection because they think, let's say I'm a preacher in a low-income community where that position is really highly regarded. So I feel good. Maybe you're an ND in a healthcare system kind of hostile to NDs. You feel like, I feel I'm coming down with the virus.
I start to feel the rhinos infiltrating.
You're feeling the rhinos. If you do ecotherapy in a place which is, you think, wow, this is perfectly suitable for this, I feel good. And if your students like it, they'll say, wow, that was awesome. They'll be, oh, I'm not such a shitty professor. I'll probably not get the flu this week. Maybe, I don't know how much. So the whole idea is that there's other factors that influence and modulate our health, not just the strictly biological.
And this is like one variable. This is how you feel in regards to your profession. So your self-esteem in regards to the profession, not self-esteem in regards to your hobbies or your relationships or other areas, or even socioeconomic status necessarily, like income. It's this, almost like where you stand in a hierarchy, a social hierarchy, and how that affects your immune system. And
I miss you so much.
I know.
Stand in the hierarchy. Can you believe that? Like, what intake assesses someone's position in a hierarchy or gives way to the idea that, social hierarchies are going to impact your health? So that matters, right? And how there's different things to account for beyond the biological, which is not to say go out and drink water from a ditch, from the curb. Biology matters. People do get infected with stuff, right? So, and there's some, but that it's complex.
Yeah, well, and don't drink water from the ditch if you hate your job.
It's even worse. Like, if that day where you feel really crappy, when I feel really crappy about being a professor or a father or something, I really need to stay away from soft drinks.
It's just, but then
even though it's what I want, right?
then you got to access the awe, decrease your IL-6 so they can get feeling some more awe.
Less chicken nuggets, more awe.
More awe. Yeah, maybe we need to start making all prescriptions.
Oh, operatives. Woo!
There you go. So this idea. Go ahead, Fernando.
And that's what bothers me, Salia, that when you say we need to start, there's already, in conventional medical system, prescriptions of nature. Mm-hmm. And I feel that, I don't know who the audience is. Hello, I imagine the whole wide world and the universe.
Absolutely, everybody.
If you weren't before, you want to listen to this podcast.
This is a great episode.
So, like, nature is in the title. Where is it in everything else? Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I get to rant and I look funny, like this old guy ranting. So that's kind of refreshing for students.
Yeah, and so this idea of biological reductionism is we're reducing everything down to, did you contact rhinovirus or not? We're not looking at your job, how you feel about your job, your friends, how much awe you're exposed to, or any of that. We're just looking at, okay, exposure to rhinovirus equals cold and flu. And you're working against this concept and accessing and talking about something called the social determinants of health, which you mentioned, which now we're gonna really get into.
Yeah.
We might as well just dive right into society.
When have we not? So, a spokesperson for the World Health Organization finds that social justice is more important for mental health than psychotherapy or medications. I can send the links. I really don't want to be spouting crap, because in Puerto Rico we live in the tyranny of opinions. So I feel that, especially now, anyone tells me anything, like, could you tell me the source? So I'm happy to share everything later. So like that social justice, which is stupid to even have reason, like, yes, of course, as communities affected by that, how it feels to like be encountering injustice all the time. Like, we know it from queer youth, like just the idea that you're not welcome in the world, one of the highest rates of suicide. The beauty of that is just one accepting adult in their lives reduces the risk by 40%. Find me the pharmaceutical, botanical, or homeopathic to get in trouble with everyone that can do that. Just one accepting relationship. And there's part of the social determinants, which is very scary. I'm very scared because I'm going to be 50 with no friends. And there's also the hope that it actually doesn't take that much. Like one confidant, one accepting adult, one trip to the park reduces anxiety for the elderly.
Right, like you could grow up in a household where you have no support systems, no supportive siblings or parents, but if you have one teacher who you're growing up with, who's a positive influence on your life, decreases the risk of mental health issues by 40%.
They call this the social network.
Right.
You know it in Canada.
Yeah.
Healthcare.
I've heard of something called
healthcare.
Facebook. Is this different?
Depends on how you use it. They call it, like, someone growing up in, I'm thinking of one particular example that has been related to me, in Amsterdam, with many risk factors, can have a level of health and a level of attainment and development socioeconomically, because there's healthcare, because there's a transportation system, because there are different professions, because there's a social network. Whereas someone with the same or lesser risk factors growing up in a place without those structural accommodations could have a very different outcome.
And it's this idea of the support network and social network that can help us, that can buoy us up against the rhinovirus in our environment, or the cardiovascular disease. or the mental health diagnoses, the genetics, whatever it may be. And 40% reduction is much different than what an herb or a pharmaceutical can deliver in most cases.
Yeah, which is not insignificant. I'm just really arguing to have a complete view of who we are, of how we are.
And your background before you entered CCNM, the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine, with all of us, you had a background in social work, working in New York City. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about your background? And also in Puerto Rico, you were doing social work there as well, where you are.
Yes. But to be fair, again, I don't want people to think that I'm lying. Is what you call that nowadays, or post-truthing. So I am trained in social work. I have a master's in social work from Hunter College, which in that world, it's cool. And back then, you have methods. So my method was community organization and planning. And I'm very happy with that. As it turned out, I have worked in human services before that and after that, but have never worked specifically as a social worker. That's a specific professional title. And none of my positions in social services have actually been that, just to be very clear. That said, I have been in social work and studied that and using those methods and idea. And my main experience, and I started that journey when I started working at a program for homeless youth as a counselor, which is a more general term. And from there, in that counseling program for homeless youth, I had the opportunity to go and study social work. I found a program that honor your work experience. And also in that program, I was the wellness coordinator, which is like the hippie in charge. And it was way back then in the 20th century. Was it the 20th century?
20th, yeah.
No, yeah. It was like towards the very end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st. The whole wellness, like that term, was beginning to be used generally, but also in human services. And so to the point that there was a position in my job in that homeless youth counseling program as a wellness coordinator, which is really like the hippie in charge. I ran nutrition groups. I really didn't know anything about nutrition, other than some basic stuff. I ran ear acupuncture groups. I did a meditation group because I've always leaned towards that because it's free. It's with your hand, with your own tools, so it's wonderful. And we had a gardening group, which I made it from being like actually super hands-on to having more of a meditative space in the garden and planting some. So there was also the seed for when I went to an introduction on naturopathic medicine programs, the program here in Puerto Rico. So to see it like as something similar to what I had done in terms of my interest, I thought, but to do it on another level with another level of skills and some tools, some practical tools like maybe labs or a prescription pad or a stethoscope, which is always very persuasive,
And you are teaching physical examination, which is kind of it's balancing it out.
It is. And actually, as a cerebral kind of person, I really was looking forward to having some more hands-on skills. And actually, that's what I teach that now, like the kind of really manual physical assessment.
Which now is being lost, especially as we move virtually, and now we're being encouraged to stay virtual, and maybe this is the future of the one-to-one therapeutic relationship in healthcare. We've experienced the decline of the physical exam, and there's a great TED Talk on how it establishes connection and therapeutic relationship to put your hands on a patient.
By Abraham Verghese.
Yes, it was a really good fictional book called Cutting for Stone. He's a good fiction writer.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, he's really good. Yeah.
So that TED Talk is the beginning of my CPD class. It's like we're going to do people, not technology. Or we're going to use technologies for relationships because that's where you work. And that's, like we mentioned, that's why heals in many ways.
We're going to use percussion before the abdominal ultrasound.
Yeah, and there's a lot of good example of how that's sensitive. And at the same time, for sure, like if you see many people, virtually you can do something. You don't necessarily need to, you don't get other information. Even then, it might be that it's not a question of information, but of transformation. So there's, you get into that subjective, honestly subjective, in which I am a subject of your mirror neurons and you're the subject of my mirror neurons. And there we create something, right? Yeah. Otherwise, I would have looked up Google podcast and we wouldn't have to have this conversation.
And hopefully you would have found this podcast and had some transformation versus information.
And this is the thing for me now all the research on virtual, blah, blah, and also the downside of the Zoomification. I don't know, can I say this in Zoom? Can I say Zoomification in Zoom? It's complex. But the whole idea, like even in school, like, you know, we have the data that says that people do just as well. And I always think, you know what, we have video, but people still prefer to go to a live concert. Like, and so there's something there that you're yanking my stethoscope by telling me that there's nothing happening there.
We're in each other's aura, and there's the opportunity to pull out the thermometer, check temperature, small things, as opposed to me telling you, Fernando, can you check your temperature for me and tell me what it says? We're having an interaction, a nonverbal interaction in some ways, but that's 80% of our interaction.
That's the other thing. Most of our communication, is what we cover, is physical. It's body language. That is most of it. And so how do these technologies capture that? Which they're great. I mean, I lived in Canada for years. Being able to talk to family and friends. Now that I'm here, I have friends from Canada, in Canada, and I have friends in England and whatnot. It's wonderful. And it serves for something. And we just also pay attention to what other needs, right? To complement it.
Yeah, well, the WhatsApp video doesn't completely replace the in-person interaction, despite how it has so many elements of it, the visual, the audio. But I was even saying, I mean, so we were recording this on Zoom, and one thing that Zoom doesn't allow for really smoothly is this transition in conversation where conversation threads overlap. I say something, you semi-interrupt me to start talking, you get excited. You can't really interrupt on Zoom. The window shifts and gives you the floor, then it gives me the floor when it detects that I'm talking. And that's different from a conversation.
Wow, that is so deep. It's very individualistic in that sense. I have the remnants of that, or very, very much of a protagonist. That's the idea that I am the protagonist now. Give me that square. But can we share the square?
We can share the square. Look, I got the square. You just had it.
You took my square.
And it fades out the audio. When the other person has the square, your audio is diminished a little bit. And then
wow.
Yeah. And this is, so actually when you were talking about social justice being one of these, I wouldn't even say a determinant of health, but a backdrop of health. I remember when we both went to a lecture on the safe injection sites that were happening in Vancouver, British Columbia, where clients of the site are allowed to inject essentially anything that they need to. And the people that they're developing that program, which was first in the world. Now there are sites in Toronto and different places, but one of the things that really surprised me about that conversation was that there are these tiny obstacles that one would never consider, not being a member of a community, such as there was a security guard sitting outside the door of the safe injection site whose role was to keep the people inside safe, the participants, the clients. But this idea of a negative experience with police and security actually prevented people from going inside and accessing the site. And so they had to come up with another solution for how do we keep people safe inside? How do we have, I don't know, security or whatever we need, you know, while removing that obstacle. And such an obstacle would never have been made apparent if they hadn't been constantly working with the community to find these answers. And so I think it speaks to, with social justice, we may not even be aware of how social justice could impact health in certain communities. Because we can think of things like, well, you know, you don't have enough money to buy, complete nutrition or supplements or see a naturopath, but there are these other insidious obstacles that may just lie unidentified.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was trying to say, but it doesn't allow me to validate what you're saying because, you know, I don't have the square. So, you know, I actually had the opportunity to volunteer at, the name escapes me, at the Vancouver Safer Injections.
Insight, was it called?
Insight, thank you. I had the opportunity to volunteer there. Very interesting program. Very radical in some ways, even from my background, having managed needle exchange programs in New York City. And they really went along with the kind of self-determination. I think how I would relate it in a way that applies to many different communities, populations, situations, is that in any situation, service requires the voice of those who are being the emphasis of that service, because good intentions are never going to account for great education, is never going to account sufficiently for that. Although they are useful and sometimes required, having people participating in their own liberation, to put it super big, in their own empowerment, it's
empowering.
Whoa, your lyrics are bottomless. It's indispensable, right? Because in that story, it's like it happens every time, you know, like they didn't realize this because nobody from the community told them that. Of course, that's stupid.
Like millions of examples, or like someone was asking me about motivational interviewing and how they might use that to encourage a community they were working with to not use the malaria nets, the anti-mosquito nets they were gifting a community for fishing. And it was like, well, give them another way to catch fish, or figure out why fishing takes the priority, because it does in this community.
Yeah, malaria is gonna hurt. But hunger hurts right now, you know?
Right now, yeah.
It's like that's killing me.
Yeah, malaria is an abstract concept when you need a fish today.
Yeah. That's perfect. And of course, women's health. It's like just the I go speechless just to think of how something has been perceived without the voice of women, and how things are applied. Even today, some pharmaceuticals are developed on groups of 18 to 50-year-old males, and so things like that. It's like, how can a group of people be so blind to what they're doing?
Well, and one of the reasons for that, I have blue teeth. One of the reasons for that is that the menstrual cycle and the hormonal changes that occur make things quote unquote too complicated to study, or they add these extra factors that throw off the results. And so if you're trying to design a study where you're hoping for a certain outcome, which is that your drug works, you're better off studying men or postmenopausal women whose hormones are more predictable, so you don't get these unforeseen effects. But what that does then is leave out an entire half of the population, almost, you know.
Especially if you start out with the idea that women are complicated. Then you validate that, in fact, they are more complicated.
Yeah.
But what requires, one of the things that I think it makes me think about is ethics. Like, what's your purpose here? It's like, going back to your example, we're here to deal with malaria, not with hunger. Like, so it's like we don't, but so you want to deal with malaria, why, if you're not dealing with hunger? What's your outcome that you're looking for? But probably it's not an outcome that it's a priority or defined by the fishing communities or by women, right? Like what's really...
It's a perfect point, right? It's like, so, you know, what makes you prioritize, why did you prioritize malaria? Or why are you only showing up to a community to help them with malaria, preventing malaria, when they're telling you or asking you to help them catch fish or eat in general? You know, it's like, if you want to help, here's the dishcloth.
Yeah.
You know. But tell us about the needle exchange in New York City. I don't think I've heard this story too much.
So I got a scholarship to study sociology in New York City, which for Puerto Ricans in the Caribbean is like our trip to Mecca. Most Puerto Ricans must make a trip to New York City. You know, I don't know what we do there, but and do it summer in New York City, like we must. And so I went to study, and my scholarship ended, and so did my interest in sociology when I had no money, and it didn't. But so I had to get a job that summer, and I happened to apply to the Street Work Project, which was truly a transformational experience for me. Which is a drop-in center and counseling program for homeless youth. How do you name the community? At-risk youth, disenfranchised youth, but generally homeless youth.
Yeah.
Yes, totally, yeah.
My favorite, yeah.
Involved, yeah. Yeah, nobody else walks on the street.
Or is involved with it. Most
not
people
involved.
are passing by, right?
Yeah, they keep it at a distance. And street involved, for sure. So I did that. I joined. I was hired as a counselor. I did that for a number of years. And when I got the position as a wellness coordinator, that included managing the needle exchange program for youth, which at that time, from what I was told, was one of the few in the United States that specifically addressed the needs of youth. And it wasn't technically a needle exchange. It didn't have to be one-to-one, so people know. That's strictly an exchange. It would just bring in whatever's used and take whatever you think you will need for the next week. And so it was, again, addressing a very unmet need, a very taboo subject, and the whole idea that you're promoting that harm as opposed to reducing it, right? There's been many pandemics and many denials of the pandemics in the history of humanity. So even when I was working, there was still a hard time dealing with a lot of work being done with HIV and AIDS, and the need to acknowledge and recognize what needs to happen if you don't want to end up in a big old mess, which is not my favorite. Like, I relate now to my present in a lot of ways from that. It's like wearing your mask in your ear. It's like having your condom in your hand. But it's not work like that. Anyway, so that was my work with the needle exchange program. Very proud of that. I'm very grateful to have been through that. And with awareness, because from the first day I thought, wow, this is going to be a really important experience in my life.
It's interesting, like there was this idea, like this underlying idea in a lot of policy making, that if you don't support any harm reduction strategies, then the condemnation of substance use, intravenous drug use, is going to somehow cause people to not use, or it's going to somehow end a substance use issue in society, which goes against all the research, which is that the more that you support people in every step of their addiction or use or whatever, the I don't know, the less harm. It's called a harm reduction strategy. And potentially there's also an increased rate of people accessing help or checking into detox facilities and things like that. Like, that's one of the side effects of the insight safe injection side is that there's a detox center right nearby, and people, because they're empowered to inject safely or use clean needles or whatever, is reducing harm in some way. It's empowering people to take the next step or whatever in their healing journey that we always talk about.
The social messages, social messaging.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for me, it's one situation where common sense, it's magical thinking. And I can understand that, like, where you help by giving them a needle, you're telling them to use drugs. So it's actually not that. And I can understand how, but then you find yourself in a situation where that's kind of magical thinking, that by telling them not to use, it's just going to happen. It's not understanding what went through. And now that we speak of trauma, it's realizing that people didn't just, taste a heroin smoothie and say, "Ooh, I like that flavor. I'm going to stick with that one, even though if it costs me my life." Mm. And so you get into the whole notion like evidence-based and research, which, has its critiques. And it was countering the kind of magical thinking, common sense for that. Because again, you lack awareness of a hormone cycle. It's like, to change that, back to that example. And yeah.
Right. Rather than excluding all women from studies, maybe we could just understand how the hormone cycle impacts the drug or vice versa, right? So rather than banning all safe injection sites, clean needle exchange programs, maybe we could just understand what someone is going through and what supports they need,
Yeah. So I can get someone else to stand here so I can do a great interview, or I can do it myself and learn from that and actually see, you could do this, you could do more of that because that works, do less of that because that doesn't work. So you can find out the truth and go from that. And I think the social meaning, again, like the social meanings help my immune system. And the social meanings help you recover from addiction. So in that sense, getting the sense that your life is valuable as an adult, as a person that's already in the world, is valuable. It might be the first time that you get that message. And if we can sort of zoom out completely, it's a message of love. It's like, somebody cares enough. And that message can chip away at all the messages of abuse, of contempt, of degradation that you might have faced in your life. Because we know which communities have higher rates of which conditions, right?
And it takes one supportive adult. Do you feel like you played a role as that person in some people's lives in that work?
I'm very much into magical numbers, speaking of, So I'm really paying attention to those numbers, like one confidant, one supporting adult. I think with addictions, the number might be higher. I don't know what the magical, how many people, how many positive messages, how does that work? How many positive messages sitting next to a river? Or, how does that work? I don't know. I think it matters. I think people felt the message was acknowledged. I don't know if it countered. With some youth, it countered, I think, enough to get to a functional survival, and survival as we have an apartment and blah, blah, blah. And for many, it did not.
And sometimes just validation of, so I do work at the Evergreen Young Street Mission, which is currently closed right now due to COVID, but there's been some patients that work with me through the journey. Again, it's drop-in health center for it's a drop-in center for youth, and there's a health center that's part of it, and street-involved youth under 24, 18 to 24 years old. Yeah. And so
it's the same program.
It's the same program.
The same type of program.
Yeah, and I think there is clean needle exchange. I'm not sure though. And they, working with some people are really just drop in, come in, let's see what acupuncture's like. Let me Snapchat it with my friend, and then leave. Others are, have persisted to see me in private practice, and once they turned 25, and yeah, and you know, just observing someone's journey and how little validation they were getting in their journey, because we had access to all the charts, including, you know, psychiatry, the medical doctors and everybody, and seeing, you know, how a narrative of somebody trying to move in some direction in life is sometimes countered by all these different voices, or not acknowledged, or not strengthened. And it could just take one person to kind of encourage that process if it's meaningful to the individual. So it's a very interesting experience. But it's also, yeah, I mean, there are so many, like you said, so many messages coming in from all sides. And, you know, maybe it takes more than just one supportive message to make a big difference.
And that's valid and good to realize. It's just that to know the numbers, not that it's a failure of the counseling program, is that a counseling program is not going to overpower racism, classism, homophobia, transphobia, and everything else. Like, you need more of a structure, and then it would absolutely change the tide.
Like those bacteria that they sense, they have quorum sensing. They sense chemicals they want to move towards and chemicals they want to get away from. But you have to have enough of those positive chemical attractants, chemoattractants.
There you go.
You've got to create some chemoattractants. Tell us about the acupuncture protocol for addiction, the NADA protocol.
So when I joined there, most people that are working in human services in New York City, I'm going to say most, but it's fairly common for you to get trained in the National Association of Detoxification Acupuncture. I believe that's what NADA stands for. It also means nothing in Spanish.
Nada.
But you got to know your community, man. The NADA protocol. And it's interesting because from my own political education and thinking, I was immediately critical of acupuncture. I thought, well, this is this reproduction of power relation where someone approaches you and causes you pain, and then you feel relieved. And I was full of shit. Like, that's why practice is good, but you gotta match your, you know. So I did it, and it was very different. And I felt it, and I used it on myself, and felt, wow, this is causing some welcome changes, helping me with some welcome changes.
What did you feel?
It lowered anxiety. And I could say physically, my somatic experience is that the ears would ask for it. They wouldn't talk to me. I haven't gotten to the point where I hear voices yet. But I would just feel like the points where I normally use them, they would kind of start to say, feed me, like the Little Shop of Horror or something like that, right? For the fans of musicals, feed me. And I say, oh, wow. Like, it's like the common saying, my body's asking for it. And I used it for many years. And in fact, that was key in me going to study to become an MD. Then I used it in another needle exchange program that I coordinated in the mountains of Puerto Rico. And I incorporated the NADA protocol. So simple, such a beautiful technology. So it's like the bicycle. What a beautiful, simple, beautiful technology. I was doing it with someone, and I hit the liver point. There's a point for the liver as a Chinese organ in the protocol, for people not familiar with it. And when I did the point for the liver, it was, ouch. It hurt really bad, more than the other points. And he said, I was going to speak Spanish. I'm going to speak Spanish. The hell, it's my podcast. I'm the ghost. Anyway, so he said, like, oh, that one really hurt. Like,
Eso me dolió.
Esa me dolió. And I guess I was switching because it was such a primordial experience for me. It was such a first-person experience that I needed to relate it in the language that he said it. So he said, oh, ouch, that one really hurt. And he said, oh, that's the liver. Maybe there's something going on with your liver. He said, oh, yeah, I haven't been able to go to the city to get my medications for hepatitis.
The body speaks.
Body speaks. It exists. It's real.
And the Nada protocols, it's 5 points on each ear inside the ear, and the ear in Chinese medicine represents the whole body. It's like an upside down fetus.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a microcosm.
It's a microcosm, of the entire system. And so there's a liver point in the ear, and it's like you said, the technology is beautiful because people don't like, typically to access certain acupuncture points, you have to remove clothing, you have to be in certain positions. Whereas with Nada protocol, you're in maybe a zero gravity chair, maybe somewhere comfortable, and you can have access to that. You don't need to touch the person. So if somebody doesn't want, any physical contact, but it's powerful, like you said.
It is. Mm-hmm. And it's non-verbal, which as a recipient and long-time recipient of therapy, it's really important for some people and some communities to have non-verbal access points to their therapy rehabilitation. So I don't need to know. Mm-hmm. You can imagine, and if not, you can read about the history of trauma that is probably present in someone with an addiction or with other communities. Having to relate that verbally to someone, it would probably be a deal breaker. Like it would be an impossible barrier for that person. Mm-hmm. So having a treatment which influences the parasympathetic system, the capacity to relax, to calm down, to feel safe, without having to speak of anything, it's really useful. It's a remarkable tool, So when I got that training, started doing it, did it, like I've done it in you cannot imagine the situations in which I've done that, or you can. And because I knew that, then when I heard of the ND programs, I sought out one in Canada because they have a healthcare system. I figured, let me know about health. And they're generally welcoming. They were not to me, but it's cool. It worked out in the end. It really worked out in the end for me. And I sought out a program which had an acupuncture component integrated. Because I knew that tool for community health, for community organizing was very, very valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we have acupuncture as part of our program, and we get licensed in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is really good. Which is really a bonus compared to other ND schools that don't always have that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would have been unthinkable to me.
I really love when you're talking about the one of the benefits of acupuncture, not a protocol, but acupuncture in general is that it's nonverbal. And I found that at Evergreen too, is that people come in and I have back pain, and you're kind of like, this is definitely something underlying that back pain, but let's just work with the back pain because you're here for 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And oftentimes, some of the individuals that access that kind of care, these kind of communities, have had the experience that their story is like a bartering point. Like I give you my story, you give me the service that I'm asking for, whether it be aid or I need to do this for legal reasons. I need to sit in front of a courtroom and tell my story. And it's very rare that the first few times or ever that story is told, that it's in a therapeutic context where that story is being used to rework a trauma or a narrative. And so it's often just, it's being given to somebody who's not necessarily receiving it in a therapeutic way. And, and it's a lot of people are tired of telling the story. And so, why don't let the body tell the story?
That was a really powerful way of putting it. There's narrative medicine and there's also narrative trafficking. And there's many relationships which engage in assistance relationships, assistencialismo, we would say, in which they really engage in a kind of trafficking and bartering, and I have to tell you, and if I up the ante with a traumatic thing, maybe I get a bit more. And we know that people of color in the US are prescribed less pain medication given their same condition, partly because they're thought wrongly to be resistant to pain. No, they can really stand pain. So it becomes part of that trafficking. It's like, I'll give you more trauma in order to get more medication, or in order to get the shelter that I need, or the service that I need, just because I'm alive. But so that's really beautiful. There's a kind of bartering. And so acupuncture and other things can allow that. We can work with the nervous system, and therefore with this history, with the social personal history that is contained there, without necessarily having to use a verbal therapy, which in different circumstances could also be life-saving, right? We don't need to choose. We just need to find what's the right choice.
And when I first got started, I thought there was something wrong with that. I felt like I'd be doing acupuncture on patients and wondering why I can't get them to quote unquote open up, and why maybe the conversation is quote unquote meaningless. So maybe they're just talking about their dog, or their, something kind of small, like what they're up to, and we're just chit-chatting. But I have to get the medical history. I have to write the medical history. I have to chart all this stuff. I need to know, what their digestion's like and all this stuff. But I start to let go of that in those brief encounters and get what's necessary, that's going to impact them in that moment. And then the rest is to give, right? Because I think as healthcare providers, a lot of us are, especially in the first encounter, it's a lot about taking. I need this information. And that could be fine if it's for the benefit of the person, and that person is working with you, and you're in this information gathering process. But it wasn't like that at Evergreen. That wasn't the context in which many people were coming in. They were coming in like, I have back pain. Can you? And I want to see what this acupuncture is all about. Fercho, tell us about so any projects that you're involved in Puerto Rico currently, because not to put any pressure on you, but what's practice looking like?
So at some point, I was honest with myself, which I think is hard for many MDs, and realized that I'm super busy. I want my son to know me and not from a Facebook profile. I have a full-time job and a community project, so I let go of the practice. Plus then hurricanes and earthquakes and pandemics happen. Pandemics or pandemias? Pandemics. Something happens, you know what I'm saying?
Pandemonium.
Pandemonium happens, is happening. So then it's just very difficult to start it now. And for a lot of people, I think for a lot of people, it's a struggle. It's difficult. I think a lot of people are moving to telemedicine. And at one point, I decided that there was all those situations. Plus, I worked so long for free. I have worked so long in services, and I realized, it's not that I'm wrong or deficient, which I am in many ways. It's just not. At this point, that for me is a big switch. So what I'm looking, if I get friends in the next 3 years, what I'm looking to develop are jobs. Let's get jobs, right? I'm sounding like a politician.
It's one of the social determinants. Hopefully jobs that make people feel like they're on top of a hierarchy and resistant to rhinovirus.
Yeah. Or not have to be on top.
Well.
But, we can work with that. They're not bottom. Like, at least they're not bottom in a hierarchy.
No, not super susceptible.
Hierarchy, we're sharing it. And so I think we need employment for the profession. I'm more leaning towards a naturist doctor. But I think it's very hard for any profession to have to be self-employed from the get-go for everyone. And people know what an engineer is. They know what engineers do. They can pronounce the word engineer. And they have to work with other people. In Canada, for a long time, by law, they have to work. Maybe 10 years, for a long time. And then you open up your thing, if you can. The same for lawyers, the same for MDs. So I think it's really important for the profession to not only focus on the development of practice, which is great, and which is why I got into it, because I wanted to have my own practice, and then many things happen, right? But also to acknowledge and work on having employed positions. In my case, when I'm trying to fit people into human services, I want some nonprofit ND, MPND. That's what would be like a long-term goal in terms of practice for me.
Well, our solutions should be, I mean, the one-to-one care model is very expensive for people because the big overhead cost is the hour visit, your time as a professional with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and then the debt of starting a practice, like you said, being self-employed from the get-go. But the actual therapies, like acupuncture needles, fresh air, water, gardening, are not very expensive. It's not a patented, brand new medication. And so,
it's a question of seeing opportunities and going back to so many things that we've talked about, having your needs assessment. One thing is to have a business plan, and another is to have a needs assessment. What does that community need? Like, are they hungry?
Or do they have malaria?
Do they want, and this, we can speak again, anti-corporate, as you know I like. But it also applies to small projects, charities, which is such an ugly word now, for left-wing movements. Sometimes you have your revolutionary discourse. The Young Lords, Puerto Rican organizing project in New York City, in Harlem, they went to the community, to El Barrio, with revolutionary ideals. We're going to change this, big plan, very macro. The community said, we want you to pick up the garbage. It's like, okay, but we're gonna really deal with revolution, structural things, like police brutality.
Like I've read Foucault.
I've read, back then it would have been Frantz Fanon or something. They read something. And the community was saying, no, like what we need, our problem is the garbage. And when they dealt with that, then the community engaged. So I think we can be very creative, recognizing that we could do a needs assessment. There's so many tools we have. It's really perplexing to be a profession that feels so lacking and have so many tools. I don't think that happens with any other profession. That the more beautiful you are, the more worthless you feel. I think it has to do with self-esteem. Back to that whole rhinovirus thing.
Yeah, I think we're all, well, it depends on how susceptible we are to rhinovirus. I think we're trying to work on it. But I like this idea of humility when it comes to working with communities. Because one could say, oh, I'm a doctor. I went to medical school. I can, I can do acupuncture, of all these skills. And you end up picking up garbage. Because that's what you need. That's what your doctoring skills are there for. If the community needs it, and that's your goal, to serve them. So Fercho, you mentioned that you had a community project that you're working on. Can you tell us about that?
For sure, Proyecto Boique. When I got back from studying in Toronto, I wanted to do community service. And through my mom, who's an elder in her church, she's always organizing things, she invited me to a health fair. And I went, and it was great. And with two graduates from CCNM who came down here and they wanted to start a global health trip, we then really named it Proyecto Boique. Boique is the healing priest figure for the local indigenous Arahuacos. And so we started that, which is my way of combining social work and natural therapeutics, which is how I present it. I try to present it as low-key as possible. And so we've been doing it. It got organized. We received 2 trips from CCNM. Then I'm wondering how helpful that is, or what's the best way to use resources. But I have continued with the local students. And in some ways, it has been integrated into the program here. So they had this class that was orphaned, and they needed someone to do it. It was a clinical rotation. I don't necessarily want to go to a hospital. That doesn't ring my bell. But I offered to take it to community. And they approved, like they had to, they had nothing. And students, of course, loved it. Imagine yourself in the second year, in the scientific battering of the first 2 years, and you get to use interview skills in some very traditional communities. Traditional communities with a lot of challenges socioeconomically. And because my experience is in public squares and with so-called homeless people. So we also do some of that. So the experience, it's incredible when you're in your second year of this, in any year really. But for us, it came in the second year, and it was like that until now, where it's been revised. And actually, now that we're on lockdown, I'm thinking of how I can get back. Like, I'm taking care of my family and my kid first, trying to protect his childhood. And when I get enough PPEs, I may get back to some of the communities that I know, and in which I feel I can work very effectively, because we can do nonverbal work. I do a lot of contact because I do acupuncture a lot, but I don't have to. I can work from 4 meters away. And because of all that we've said, I think maybe in there it's part of what's going on, and it's part of service therapy, which is something that I've developed, and at some point I would like to put it down on paper or on screen. Maybe someone that's a really good writer helps me. We can do a duo, like service therapy, because as far as I know, it hasn't been coined, and you get such a jolt. You get such an emotional B12. I get so much inspiration and purpose, and most people do. So I want to keep working on that.
What kind of things? You guys do a lot of manual therapies, and are they indigenous communities you said that you're working with?
The word is the indigenous word for that person. I work in broad Puerto Rican communities, not. As far as I know, there's some more recent identification as indigenous, in the sense that you would have in North America. Here, it hasn't been as common. Like, it's a smaller population. So in some ways, we have our diversity more broadly distributed. I want to try to say it without necessarily negating the experience of people that identify as indigenous. But it feels that what I encounter more, it's a racial reality of Afro-Puerto Ricans and poor people. So that would be the community. A lot of poverty, homelessness, and Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Puerto Rican. And then now with all the different so-called disasters, the social disasters, after natural events, we've been working in broadly in many, many different places with many different communities affected by those events. It's wonderful. I'll let you know the next time.
Yeah, I wanna explore it. I wanna come visit. What's the surfing like near you?
Are you kidding me? Where was the first professional surfing contest held, Talia? Puerto Rico, baby.
Puerto Rico.
Oh, yeah.
Puerto Rico. Yeah.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
It was here. I actually learned that. So we are called the Hawaii of the Atlantic,
Oui.
You want surfing, this is the place to surf. If you drink coffee, this is the place to drink coffee.
Whoa, this is
Best
so
pineapples in the
social
world.
medicine.
There you go. What could be better?
And can you talk a little bit about service therapy in your book?
Which is probably never gonna in the book in my head.
That's it.
If you're asking me, I'll expand it a little bit. In one of my relationships, my partner at the time, which was a very difficult time in my life, having returned to Puerto Rico in the middle of that adaptation, she said, you need to go back to your work, which is my work is human services, because that's when you feel happy. And for someone that at the point in which they knew me, it was very interesting to get that and have later confirmed that I am getting a greater therapeutic value, or equal or greater than the one that I'm providing. And sometimes I provide, I would dare say, really good therapeutic value to those people in those communities. And I know that it inflates me with life. It really fills me up with life, as that person recognized, because it was very obvious. And I have tested again and again, if my leaves are sagging, my water is service. And it really helps balance me. And so I have begun calling it that, sharing it with the students, developing a mutual aid model, which thankfully it's a word that is becoming more current, as it should. And we have this mutual aid model where we don't necessarily go to give, but we go to create health with those people. And we get service therapy. Like, doing service has therapeutic benefits for us in that position, and that's well validated. Massage programs for the elderly find that giving a massage to another person lowers their blood pressure. Boom! Service therapy. So in the book that I'm going to write with someone that's into writing like that, knows NDs and whatnot, that's some of the research on what we can explore.
This is amazing. Well, it reminds me of how in the medical system, the conventional medical system, there's extremely high rates of burnout, which they've stopped referring to as burnout and now are calling moral injury. This idea of knowing that someone across from you is suffering, and that the tools or the context that you're working in are not allowing you to fully help that person. This is the opposite thing. You're sitting across from somebody and your mutual goal is to elevate their health, however that might look, and the other person is receiving it and grateful and appreciative, and you feel valued and you feel like your work is valuable, and it's the antidote to sagging leaves, to burnout. Moral repair.
And that's a really opportune observation, because what you could think about service therapy, service, that's murder. And people die, and all kinds of more injury, which in that sense is which applies to any therapy, really. Like any limitation, I ran needle exchange programs, but at some point I'm feeling stupid because I know the government is not putting the policies in place. Like we're not gonna change the tide one youth at a time. So in that sense, even as much as I can defend with evidence the program that I'm doing, we need macro structural coordination. And so back to that, there's burnout. There's, as you know, and as you and I know, I'm still burnt out from CCNM, and then having a kid, and then all that. It's like I'm dying. And service can really be depleting. Like people in care of elderly, people in care of Alzheimer's, very high risk positions. Like service can be very high risk. And so I find it, from just my personal experience to know that it's also a therapy, and then to engage in the conversation as to how do we make service a therapy and not a tyranny, right? Not a burden, not a risk. And what are the conditions for that? And at this point, I've been in service enough that this project that I'm doing, I'm taking it very slow and doing it in the ways that are therapeutic. And not growing or doing things which could be very draining. But I think it's very important to like speak of exhaustion, physical and emotional exhaustion, of moral injury when you're really at odds with the system or lack of system, and on the possibility of this wonderful thing that you get when we help each other. That doesn't even start to cover. I don't have the words for that. When we create that, when we connect,
Where you feel like your work is meaningful and it protects you against rhinovirus. It really is.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Which is the beauty of those projects for you, that job I had, is that I never had to, I never have to explain to anyone why I do what I do. Wherever I would go, I would say, that's what I do. That's that. You don't question why or what is it about. No, that must be done. And so that sense of purpose, which I still have from my work in teaching, I have in community work, that sense of purpose, woo, can get you through a pandemic.
Yeah,
and earthquakes, and a huge hurricane, and poverty, and being the last colony in the world.
And power outages and all the other stuff.
And power outages,
How do you stay, so you were mentioning, so a few things like the risks of service, and then this really tiptoeing, being careful with it, which I'm interpreting as tiptoeing away around the exhaustion precipice, trying not to fall over the edge, which is not an easy thing to do when you're in a community setting and seeing all the need that might be showing itself. But how do you manage that?
Do I don't know.
Like, how do you manage to keep it meaningful? Sometimes, all of us.
Keep it meaningful because of the concept you mentioned, humility. And I feel that's an important piece of it, and acceptance. Part of that empowerment exercise, in which I first need to accept your need to fish, your hormonal cycle, your garbage all over your community. I need to do that acceptance. And I then need to accept my role in that, my humility in that role, and not oversell it, which happens, or underestimate it. This is what I can do, and this is what I work with, and you let me know, and if you want to, like, if it's useful to you. And time, I'm known for not ending. Like, I work very long shifts. When I open up in community, we stay there. And the purpose drives me. And then I know I have to stop. And I can recognize things that you need bench time, to me. I mean, it's hard right now because I have other many things burning me out. So the community is sort of my escape. And because it doesn't happen as a job. One thing, when I did have a job in service, we work 4 days. You have time limitations. You need enough time away. They call that distraction now in the literature. You need to think about some other crap.
You need to watch some Netflix or something.
Whatever does it for you, whatever does it for you, that is not that. So you need time away. A magic number is 2 weeks. They say 2 weeks away from the job. It's what you need to recover. Who knows? For me, humility, accepting the limitations of it, accepting that I don't decide also.
Mm.
I decide, I make clinical decisions, but it's up to the person to tell me how I am useful to them, which can be hard when you're some type of witch doctor, alternative, blah, 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 because we already, we come with that self-esteem injury, right? So it can be difficult because you need to assert yourself. But I've tasted enough service therapy to know that that's bullshit too. Like you don't need my stethoscope. You need me to pay attention to you and to be truthful with you and say, from what I have, it sounds like this could be. And also, I accept my learning. I accept that I'm a student. I'm another student there, and I present myself as that. And I also present it as mutual aid. We're collaborating here. And I'm not being flattering. That's not a pretty discourse. Like, I know. Like, I know. And every time I get histories that tell me, wow, I really am here as a student. I'm here, just help, I'm carrying your bags for you. And in that sense, I don't have an ego. I'll carry your bags for you, you know what I'm saying? And if I tell you an anecdote, after the Hurricane Maria, we went to Utuado, which is in the mountains, where a lot of landslides have happened. And the community was disconnected from the rest for a while. And when we set up in a school that was not open yet. And a woman came because she had elbow pain. So she had. And it's meaningful that she was a woman because she was traditionally in charge of washing clothes. And all clothes was washed by hand, river. And said, anything else I can help you with? Anything going on? He said, no, that's it. Like, if you can help me with my elbows. And that's fine. Like a simple acupuncture session, points that are general knowledge. So when we're driving out, I see her sitting in a balcony of what used to be her house, except there's no house left. It's only the foundation and a chair, which she had in what used to be the balcony. And this was the person that told me, I only have elbow pain. Everything else I'm handling. Oof, I want to cry. So at this point, I know that somebody might protect me like that from my own arrogance, my own cognitive distortions, my own bullshit. Somebody might offer that protection to me in giving me perspective of how to frame it. And so I walk in there, I do acupuncture, works this way, I do this. I work a lot of lifestyle. What is called lifestyle, because having 3 jobs is really not a lifestyle. But until I find a better name, I work basic conditions for health, I guess. And light came out. If you want to see me in the big Zoom now.
There you go.
You see, I know light goes out, it's going to come back at some point. And if it doesn't, then we won't have light pollution tonight, and I'll be able to sleep better. More melatonin for me, less light pollution.
You're getting melatonin.
That's how I feel bad. I feel I didn't give you an answer, or maybe I am accepting a question that I shouldn't accept, give you the answer to burnout. That is some of what I think about that.
Well, I think that it's a good answer because when you talk about humility...
Oh, you flatter me.
Which is, so humility, not humiliation, right? We're not talking about shame or this sense of smallness. We're talking about this sense of, because when I think of humility, I think that it's a sister of awe.
My God!
You see that?
Oh!
You're standing at
Sorry
the
for interrupting.
Something bigger. And when you're describing this woman with the elbow pain, it was a sense of awe of, wow, this is what you're capable of. And the only thing that you came to me that you quote unquote couldn't handle was your elbow pain, and everything else you were handling. And I feel like your IL-6 went down as you were telling that story.
As you were explaining to me, because as you were saying, I was thinking, what? It's like humility has a kinship to all. And you said it because I mean, that's why I stick with you. That's so wonderful. I will go with humility, and I come out with awe. Or it's a way, do that work so that you can position yourself for humility and awe. And in fact, some of the exercises that I do with the groups have to do with fatigue, compassion fatigue. I said it in Spanish. With compassion fatigue. And the questions are, what inspired you? What surprised you? What moved you? So knowing that those questions will help you recover, as we know, prevention is even better than recovery. So if I go into it already thinking of humility and service as a therapy and the possibility of being in awe, which I hadn't, now you just changed the game. That's like, that's how we come, because it's so close to awe. Because you're going to be, because the people you're going to meet are going to be awesome.
Awesome. So what the questions are, what inspired you? What moved you?
And what surprised you?
And what surprised
you? What moved you? What surprised you? And what inspired you?
And what inspired you?
Literature review of the research says that exercise with interns in San Francisco, it lower levels of anxiety. It helped with recovery and the maintenance of compassion and connection during the exercise, which I think was 6 weeks, and up to a year after. So it's been validated, which is helpful. Like I'm being a clown because I'm a clown, but I think it's helpful to know that things have been checked out from another perspective, because we like to believe things that are not working for us.
Yeah, it's nice to get validation.
Yeah, no, validation is cool. And
scientific validation, that's the best kind of validation. It's the kind we care about as a society.
It's one kind. It's good. I mean, that lady in Pueblo, she gave me validation that a million methodologies cannot give. That was a punch in my stomach, a good punch. That was a super warm embrace. And reading a study that tells me about IL-6 and writing exercises and compassion fatigue also gives me good validation. Like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah.
It's beautiful, Fercho. Is there anything else you want to end on?
I'm completely satisfied.
I'm going to put the links.
I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. We had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we were back up and running. And I'm gonna the links are gonna be in the description for your project, your website, anything else you want to share with me. And thank you so much for chatting with me through power outages, pandemics, and everything else.
Good mood through a blackout.
And through a blackout, exactly.